Why do women over 40 go crazy and break up families? Word hook. Something happens to women when they cross 40 that almost nobody wants to talk about. One day she's packing lunches, doing laundry, taking care of the kids, and planning the next family vacation. Then suddenly, she's glued to her phone, downloading dating apps, buying lingerie, spending extra hours getting ready, and smiling at messages you never see. And you're left standing there, confused, wondering what the hell just happened to the woman you married. But here's the truth no one prepared you for. This shift isn't random, it isn't sudden, and it isn't about you. It's a psychological time bomb that starts ticking long before you ever met her. And it goes off between ages 35 and 45 in almost every woman. Men everywhere are watching their stable, dependable wives turn into complete strangers. Not because the marriage fell apart, but because her identity did. And once this transformation begins, it rarely stops. When a woman crosses 40, the change you see on the surface is nothing compared to what's happening inside her mind. This is the part men never understand, because nobody teaches them how deeply a woman's identity is tied to how the world responds to her. From her teenage years onward, her value is measured through attention. Compliments, stares, admiration, the feeling of being wanted everywhere she went. For 2 decades, this validation wasn't just present, it was automatic. But around 40, that automatic validation stops. Not all at once, but slowly enough that she feels it slipping through her fingers. And when she looks in the mirror and sees someone slightly older, slightly different, it triggers something far deeper than insecurity. It triggers identity collapse. She is not just losing beauty, she's losing the version of herself she has known her entire life. And this collapse doesn't make her reflective, it makes her desperate. Instead of adapting gracefully, she panics, she fights reality. She becomes obsessed with proving to herself that she still has it, even if that proof destroys her marriage, her stability, and the life she built. This is why men feel blindsided. They think their wife is going through a phase. They think she will calm down. But this isn't a mood swing. It's a psychological storm driven by biology, fear, and a lifetime of conditioning. And once it starts, it becomes nearly impossible to stop. The most dangerous part of a woman's midlife shift isn't the aging, the mirror, or even the panic. It's the first hit of outside validation. That single moment when a stranger, a co-worker, or a guy at the gym gives her attention she hasn't felt in years. To you, it's nothing. To her, it's oxygen. Because your attention, no matter how sincere, is expected. You're the husband. You're supposed to find her attractive. You're supposed to compliment her. You're supposed to love her unconditionally. But a stranger? He doesn't owe her anything. So when he notices her hair, her outfit, her smile, her brain floods with dopamine in a way you simply cannot replicate anymore. That one compliment becomes proof that she is still relevant, still attractive, still visible. And once she gets that taste, she starts craving more. She starts dressing differently, posting more on social media, spending more time outside the house, and becoming obsessed with how others see her. You'll notice her suddenly putting effort into things she never cared about before. You might think she's improving herself, but what she's really doing is chasing validation like a drug. This is why midlife women become vulnerable to emotional affairs. They aren't searching for love. They're not searching for sex. They're searching for the feeling of being desired by someone who has no obligation to desire them. And that chase, once activated, can spiral into decisions that shatter families. Because the thrill of being chosen again becomes stronger than logic, commitment, and sometimes even motherhood. Every man thinks aging affects a woman slowly. Wrinkles here, grey hair there, maybe some insecurity. But what actually destroys her isn't the physical change, it's the psychological collapse that comes with it. One day she looks in the mirror and realizes she is no longer the woman the world praised, pursued, and validated. For 20 years, she lived in a reality where attention was automatic. Men stared, smiled, complimented, flirted. She never had to earn it. It was simply given. But now, the same world that once revolved around her doesn't even glance in her direction. This sudden drop creates a brutal identity crisis. Her entire self-worth, built on youth, beauty, and desirability, starts to crumble. She's not just aging, she's becoming invisible. And invisibility terrifies her more than anything. Not because she wants random men, but because being desired was the foundation of who she believed she was. When that foundation collapses, she panics. She starts trying to fix herself. New hair, new clothes, new routines, new friends, hoping to resurrect a version of herself that time already took away. And when these changes don't work, she doesn't look inward. She doesn't ask what truly matters. She looks outward and asks, who will make me feel alive again? This is the moment marriages become fragile, because she stops seeing her husband as a partner and starts seeing him as a reminder of what she's losing. And instead of accepting reality, she runs from it, straight into fantasies, nostalgia, and emotional danger. Here's the part most men never understand. When a woman hits her late 30s and early 40s, your love, loyalty, and devotion don't register the same way anymore. Not because she's ungrateful, not because she's evil, but because her brain no longer reacts to predictable affection. The attention she gets from you, her husband, her partner, her familiar safety net, becomes normal. It loses its emotional weight. It becomes expected, and what is expected never feels exciting. But then something dangerous happens. A stranger, maybe someone at the gym, at work, online, or even someone who barely knows her, gives her a compliment, and suddenly her brain lights up like fireworks. Why? Because it's unexpected, because it's new, because it proves she still has value outside her home. To her, that one random compliment can feel more powerful than 10 years of your loyalty, not because it's meaningful, but because it taps into the deepest fear she has, the fear of becoming invisible. When she realizes she can still catch someone's attention, someone who doesn't owe her anything, she feels alive again for the first time in years. This hit of validation becomes addictive. She might not chase the man, but she chases the feeling he gave her. And no matter how supportive, loving, or devoted you are, you cannot recreate that feeling. You represent stability. He represents possibility. You represent commitment. He represents novelty. You represent the life she already has. He represents the life she imagined she lost. And that contrast creates a psychological storm strong enough to make her question everything, even a marriage built over decades. That's why the danger doesn't start with cheating. It starts with a compliment. It starts with a spark. It starts with a reminder that she's not invisible yet. One of the clearest signs a woman is entering the danger zone is when she suddenly becomes obsessed with her past. It happens quietly at first. She finds an old photo album. She scrolls through old Facebook memories. She laughs at stories she hasn't mentioned in years. But look closely. She isn't just remembering her past. She's comparing it to her present, and the comparison is killing her inside. At 40, her memories feel brighter than her reality. In her mind, she wasn't just younger back then. She was freer, desired, wanted, admired. Those years weren't just her youth. They were the peak of her perceived value. So when she starts retelling old stories with a sparkle in her eyes, it's not nostalgia. It's mourning. She isn't missing the past versions of her life. She's missing the past version of herself. And here's the brutal part. Once she starts idolizing her past, her present begins to feel like a mistake. Suddenly the man she married becomes the reason she settled. The children she raised become the cause of her lost identity. The responsibilities she once embraced now feel like chains she never noticed until it was too late. Nostalgia becomes a weapon her brain uses against her reality. This is when she starts reconnecting with old friends, especially the divorced ones. Those women pour gasoline on the fire already burning inside her. They don't encourage her to fix her life. They encourage her to escape it. And when she compares her current life to their curated, filtered, freedom-filled highlights, the gap becomes unbearable. Nostalgia convinces her that her best years were stolen, not lived. And once she believes that, she begins searching for someone, anyone, who can make her feel like that girl again. Not because she wants adventure, but because she wants resurrection. If there's one factor that accelerates a woman's midlife collapse more than anything else, it's the influence of divorced friends. These women appear harmless at first, coffee, dates, gym sessions, girls' nights, but beneath the surface they act like dealers distributing a psychological drug far more dangerous than any substance. The belief that she deserves more. These friends don't encourage gratitude, rebuilding, or maturity. They encourage escape. They convince her that responsibility is oppression, stability is settling, and any moment she spends unhappy is a moment stolen from her true self. Suddenly, normal marital issues are rebranded as emotional abuse. Routine becomes imprisonment. Sacrifice becomes exploitation. These women rewrite her entire marriage for her, framing her as the victim and you as the villain, because they need validation for their own choices. See, a divorced friend hates one thing more than anything else: a woman who is still married and functioning. Her very existence is a threat because it reminds them of what they lost. So they drag your wife into their world of self-justification. Girls' nights turn into therapy sessions where the therapist is bitterness itself. Their advice isn't wisdom, it's projection. And your wife absorbs every word because it feeds the fear already growing inside her. Combine this with social media and you get a perfect storm. Now she's scrolling through filtered fantasies, seeing divorced women traveling, partying, glowing, living their best life. No one shows the loneliness, the financial struggle, the depression, the regret. They only show the highlight reel, and she begins to believe that leaving her marriage isn't destruction, it's transformation. These friends don't push her to fix her life, they push her to abandon it. And once she joins that circle, she doesn't just question her marriage, she resents it. Social media is the fuel that turns a midlife identity crisis into a full-blown emotional wildfire. Because once someone starts feeling insecure about aging, appearance, or their routine life, the algorithm knows exactly what to feed them. It becomes a mirror that reflects not who they are, but who they fear they're not. Suddenly every scroll shows glowing faces, perfect vacations, flawless skin, and women their age who look 10 years younger. And the worst part? It looks real. It looks achievable. It looks like the life she should have had. Now she isn't comparing her life to reality anymore. She's comparing it to staged photos, edited bodies, filtered skin, and moments designed to deceive. Every highlight from someone else's life becomes a silent accusation. Why aren't you living like this? And the more she scrolls, the stronger the belief becomes that she's missing out on excitement, missing out on freedom, missing out on the version of herself she thought she'd become. Suddenly, ordinary life feels like failure. A stable home feels like a trap. A loyal partner feels like routine. And the illusion crafted by strangers on the internet feels like truth. She doesn't realize she's comparing her behind the scenes to someone else's carefully edited fantasy. She only knows it hurts. This is when resentment starts growing silently. Not because her life is bad, but because the online world convinces her it could be better, younger, more glamorous, more exciting. Social media doesn't just influence her emotions, it rewrites her expectations. It whispers that change is brave, that dissatisfaction is empowerment, that leaving is evolution. And in that illusion, even the most stable life can begin to look like a cage. The most terrifying part of a midlife unraveling isn't the external changes, it's the emotional withdrawal that you barely notice until it has already taken over. It starts quietly. She becomes distant, distracted, absorbed in her thoughts. Conversations feel shorter, colder, heavier. The warmth that once came naturally now feels forced, almost scripted. You ask her what's wrong and she says nothing, but her silence speaks louder than any argument ever could. This emotional pullback isn't caused by you, it's caused by the battle happening inside her. When someone begins questioning their identity, their value, their youth, or their life choices, the first thing they disconnect from is the person closest to them. Not because they stopped caring, but because you represent stability at the exact moment they're craving reinvention. Your predictability reminds them of the years that have passed. Your love reminds them of the version of themselves they no longer feel connected to. Soon the withdrawal intensifies. She needs space. She needs me time. She starts getting irritated at small things that never bothered her before. Or worse, she becomes overly calm, overly polite, overly agreeable. And that fake calmness is far more dangerous than any argument. It's the calm of someone who has already checked out emotionally but hasn't left physically. The routines you built together become optional for her. The intimacy you shared becomes mechanical. The future you planned becomes negotiable. And when you finally sense that something big is shifting, it's usually because it already has. Emotional withdrawal is the first sign that her internal world is changing. And when someone begins to detach internally, the external changes always follow. By the time you feel the distance, she has already been drifting for months. At a certain point in a midlife identity crisis, reality is no longer enough. Not because life is bad, but because the fantasy in someone's mind becomes louder, brighter, and more seductive than anything real. It starts when they begin imagining a different version of themselves, one who's younger, freer, more desired, more adventurous. This fantasy grows quietly in private moments until it becomes the emotional escape they rely on. And once fantasy becomes the comfort, reality starts feeling like a burden. They're not comparing you to another person. They're comparing you to an imaginary world where everything feels new again. And the problem with fantasy is that it has no flaws, no responsibilities, no limitations. It's perfect, because it isn't real. But the more they feed that fantasy, the less appealing real life becomes. Family routines feel dull, commitment feels heavy. The life you built together feels like a cage holding them away from the excitement they see in their imagination. And here's where it becomes dangerous. Once someone attaches their longing to a fantasy, they start looking for a real person to pin it onto. It could be a coworker, a gym trainer, an old friend, or a random stranger who said something nice at the right moment. That person becomes the symbol of the fantasy, an escape portal from the life they no longer feel connected to. They're not attracted to the person, they're addicted to the idea the person represents. Fantasy doesn't just distort reality, it replaces it. And once someone believes that happiness is out there, somewhere else, with someone else, in some other life, nothing you say or do feels like enough, because you're real. And fantasy always wins against reality, until it collapses. One of the most shocking parts of a midlife unraveling is how suddenly the past gets rewritten. The same memories that once brought smiles, gratitude, and nostalgia begin to twist into something darker. It's not intentional, it's psychological self-protection. When someone feels trapped between who they were and who they want to be, they start altering their story to justify the impulse to break free. Moments that were once cherished become exaggerated burdens. Happy years shrink into lost time. Normal disagreements get rebranded as emotional wounds. And the person who once felt like their safe place now becomes the symbol of everything they want to escape. This rewriting isn't because the memories changed, it's because they changed. Their new identity can't coexist with the old narrative, so the brain edits the script to support the new direction. It's easier to walk away from a distorted past than a beautiful one. It's easier to blame the relationship than confront the frightening truth that the real conflict is internal. So they rewrite, they reshape, they reframe. Not to hurt you, but to relieve themselves of guilt. Suddenly, the years of stability become routine. The sacrifices become control. The loyalty becomes expectation. And every moment you thought was meaningful becomes questioned in hindsight. You feel blindsided, confused, even betrayed. But what you're really seeing is someone trying desperately to align their new identity with a story that justifies their choices. It's not the past that's being attacked. It's the version of themselves they no longer want to be. And that's why these rewritten stories feel so painful. They erase the life you built together, not because it wasn't real, but because accepting its reality makes their internal conflict harder to face. And there comes a moment in every midlife identity crisis when the shift becomes irreversible, not because the relationship is broken, but because the person experiencing the crisis no longer recognizes themselves. They feel trapped between who they were and who they imagine they must become, and that pressure pushes them toward decisions that shock everyone around them. This isn't rebellion, it's collapse. A collapse of identity, purpose, confidence, and emotional stability. And once that collapse begins, logic doesn't matter. Loyalty doesn't matter. Even consequences don't matter. All that matters is the desperate attempt to feel alive again. This is the point where routine responsibilities, family, stability, partnership begin to feel suffocating. Not because they truly are, but because the person in crisis associates them with a version of themselves they're trying to shed. They start chasing novelty. They start seeking emotional highs. They start believing that change, any change, will bring clarity or relief. And this is how stable lives get dismantled. Not through hatred, but through confusion. What people rarely understand is that this moment isn't fueled by strength. It's fueled by fear. Fear of aging. Fear of invisibility. Fear of unfulfilled dreams. Fear of becoming ordinary. And when fear takes over, destruction feels like liberation. This is why some people abandon good lives, good partners, good homes, not because those things lacked value, but because they clash with the fantasy of who they want to become. By the time the crisis reaches this stage, reasoning fails, compromise fails, support fails, because you're not dealing with a relationship problem, you're dealing with a personal identity battle that has swallowed them whole. And once someone believes their only path to happiness is to burn everything down, they don't stop to consider what's lost in the flames. In the end, the most painful part of a midlife identity crisis isn't the chaos it creates, it's the silence that follows. Because once the dust settles, once the fantasy fades, once the adrenaline wears off, reality always comes back. The excitement that felt like freedom turns into exhaustion, the validation that felt addictive becomes temporary, and the life that once seemed boring suddenly feels safe again. But by then, the damage is already done. People rarely understand this. A midlife unraveling isn't about choosing someone else over you, it's about choosing an imagined version of themselves over the person they actually are. It's a battle no partner can win because you're not fighting another man. You're fighting their fear, their panic, their desire to outrun time. And time always wins. You could have been perfect. You could have loved harder. You could have sacrificed more. But none of it would have stopped a crisis they were fighting inside their own mind. So what can you do? You rebuild. You protect your peace and you learn the signs you missed. You understand that their decisions were never a measurement of your worth. And most importantly, you refuse to let someone else's crisis destroy the future you still deserve. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. You can't save someone who's trying to escape themselves. You can only save yourself. And when the storm finally passes, when fantasy collapses, when reality returns, the person left standing is the one who stayed grounded, steady, and self-respecting. Even while everything around them fell apart, that person is you, and that's where your story begins.